In this classic story, young love grows between an orphan and the daughter of a plantation owner. Miss Hanabusa begins the scenario by telling the tale of Joe and Grace. Their destinies are linked from the beginning. When the guy who is seeking his mother approaches, little Joe runs away. His mother, who gave birth to him outside of marriage, has kept him hidden. The coffee pickers, who ordinarily wouldn't have let her in, were successfully kept from seeing the youngster by the woman. They believe that kids like this only bring humiliation and ill fortune. When the guy screams out his mother's name, he discovers that she has died from an unknown illness. As destiny would have it, Grace's mother succumbs to the same illness on the same day, becoming Miss Hanabusa Grace's guardian. The two kids are from different racial and social backgrounds. Despite not being aware of one another, they are both experiencing sadness and anguish. Grace is surrounded by her family, while young Joe is alone. As he sees her mother being carried away, he sits by himself and weeps in silence. Joe dries his eyes and begins to follow the wagon in which his mother is lying. Never letting his mother out of his sight, he rushes through the bush, the separated coffee fields, and wherever the cart turns. Joe carefully waits in the pitch dark outside a workplace until his mother is free. He approaches her and pulls a necklace off her neck while the guys are distracted. He gives his mother a kind look, but he leaves before he can be seen by another guy, who warns the youngster to keep away from her. It belongs to Grace. She observes Joe fleeing as she sits in the window and looks out the window. There is nowhere to go for Joe. Its society is highly classist. Everywhere he goes, people avoid him. People make fun of him and treat him like an outsider. When he notices a vendor offering food, he chooses a quiet spot in the corner and enjoys his own company. Since his mother went away, Joe hasn't eaten. He enters the line after being drawn there by hunger. He accepts the meal in return for something priceless since he has no money. The merchant becomes enraged by this and pushes Joe to the ground while demanding payment. The toddler doesn't understand why he is upset and keeps eating because he fears the food seller will take it away if he doesn't. Before something can get worse, a white guy intervenes to rescue the youngster. He pays for him, but Joe leaves before he can attend to him. The guy is the physician whom Grace's plantation owner father hired. After speaking with the mayor, Doc learns that they are unable to give him the amount of money that was agreed upon. The mayor persuades him to remain for a while since they desperately need a doctor, despite his reasonable rage and intention to return in a month. Doc is a good guy, and if things go well, he'll stay longer. Joe follows the doc, since he is the only other person, save his mother, who has shown compassion for him. The first time Doc sees his home, it's worse than he had anticipated. Even animals find the area to be uninhabitable and a total mess. He is forced to stay there since he has no other choice. The next day, he observes Joe following him but says nothing. To meet the mayor, he goes to the market. There is also Miss Hanabusa present. When Doc discovers her looking at him, she hurriedly turns her head away. He dismisses the interaction. Doc complains to the mayor about his new home, but they can only afford this. He asks around about the youngster who continues to follow him, but nobody is aware of his origins. He just materialized one day and has been behaving in this manner ever since. An employee suddenly bursts in, stating that his wife has become ill. The mayor cautions him that these people don't trust foreign medicine before sending him out, but Doc is sure. He doesn't waste any time and departs right away. When the doctor visits the patient at home, he discovers that the symptoms are those of an allergic response called anaphylaxis. The spouse is startled as he takes out an injection. The doctor insists that this is the only way they can save her life, despite his refusal. The guy doesn't get the significance due to the language barrier, and there is a fight. By mistake, the doctor spills the injection. There isn't any more of the medication he needs to preserve her life. Doc finds Joe viewing this through a brook. He approaches him and requests his assistance in translating, indignantly asking the boys to go since there is a prevalent notion that half-breeds only bring bad luck. The husband doesn't want to hear anything more. Despite the man's objections, Doc instructs the youngster to go get another bag similar to the one he is carrying from his residence. Joe first looks at him, which makes Doc believe that his efforts may not be in vain. However, to his astonishment, the child turns around and begins running. The doctor eagerly awaits Joe's arrival, as they are in a race against time. He outperforms Doc's expectations and arrives just in time with the luggage. He commends him for his efforts and follows Joe into the man's home. Man attempts to stop them once again, but Doc's fast reflexes allow him to knock him unconscious. Doc pushes the guy outside before locking the door. Joe keeps a close eye on the doctor while he attends to her. He successfully administers the shot, saving his wife's life. He asks him for his name before bringing Joe along. When the mayor questions him about the work upon his arrival, Doc praises Joe for saving the woman's life. Joe exhibits his mother's necklace when they inquire about his parents. The mayor immediately recognizes it and is shocked to learn that it is her son. She lived alone on the mountain, far from anyone. Since his mother died from the plague, the doctor tests him to see whether he has any signs. Fortunately, he is as healthy as one in his situation can be. Joe has nowhere to go until the boat arrives in a month, so Doc lets him stay with him. Doc brings Joe to his house so he can get everything he needs there on the way back to their home. When they enter, they see photographs of Joe's mother on the table. As soon as he gently takes it up, the painful memories of the loss he is now experiencing come flooding back to him. The grief strikes him as he sits on the bed and stares down, but he's not alone this time. As he gently consoles him, Doc sits next to him. To make himself feel better about his own loss, he confides in Joe about his own. When they arrive at the property, Doc introduces himself while Joe interprets. He apologizes for not bowing in the traditional Japanese manner, explaining that the conflict has harmed his back. Joe foolishly omits the last clause and claims he doesn't bow because his back aches, giving off a narcissistic impression. Joe first encounters Grace as they return on foot. Miss Hanabusa and Mr. Danielson are riding on a cart. Joe, a young boy, is captivated by her attractiveness. He even trips and falls as a result of a shock upon seeing her. Doc grins and thinks this is charming. Since then, 10 years have passed. Joe, who now serves as Doc's medication courier, has developed into a gorgeous young man. Every day, he waits at the bridge for the driver, Taki. They compete head-to-head to the very end to discover who will prevail. Taki goes via road, while Joe takes a far different path, passing through mountains, forests, and crossing a river. He outperforms the driver at the finish line, like he does every day. The whole audience gathers to see the outcome and applauds Joe when he places first. Grace rushes to her window as she hears the ruckus inside. She stumbles over after getting her leg caught below the table. Even so, she manages to reach the window and sees Joe. Every morning, as she waits for him to arrive, Grace does this. Despite having a debt to repay, Mr. Danielson won't sell his equipment and instead requests more time. Grace has hurt her ankle, and Miss Hanabusa advises her to seek medical attention. He spends much of his time with the ill employees. Therefore, he doesn't want the doctor to even approach her, but he hesitantly accepts when she explains that Grace also has a fever. Hanabusa visits Doc, but he is unluckily away in a city, and it will be 2 days before he returns. Joe volunteers to assist since Doc has been teaching him and believes he is capable of filling in for him. She accepts, which surprises him and leaves him speechless. After gathering himself, he sprints to fetch his belongings. Doc is with a legal firm in Hilo. He is really in adoption negotiations with a lawyer and is not here for medical treatment. He now wants to provide him with a place in the society that despises him because he has learned to love him. Even though the law forbids such adoptions, the guy offers the man all of his money to make it happen. When Joe arrives at their residence, he is tense and exhausted. He is greeted by Miss Hanabusa, who instructs him to wait. Inside, Mr. Danielson tells Joe to go since he is furious with him for even approaching his home. Grace has been anticipating this moment her whole life and isn't ready to let it pass now that it's so near. This time, she makes up an injury, forcing her father to let him in. There is a curtain between them, so Joe cannot see her. She is only permitted to remove one leg from the hanging bed. Through the little gap, he can see her, and their eyes lock. He keeps looking over at her as he delicately applies a bandage to the wound. When he's finished, Miss Hanabusa begs him to depart, so he goes, but not before bidding Grace farewell. Doc is back and dissatisfied with Joe's choice. He chastises him for attempting such a monumental endeavor on his own and in his absence. Doc and Joe are replaced by a different doctor, whom Mr. Danielson hires. They take Grace in for a checkup, and Doc hopes to make a good impression on Mr. Danielson this time. Because of his love for Joe, he is unable to hold his rage for an extended period of time. Grace gets ready and puts her hair in a lovely braid to enhance her beauty. When the doctor inquires as to her condition, she replies that although her leg is better this time, her stomach has been aching. Danielson has established certain regulations to keep them as far away from her as possible, since she finds them repulsive. It is more difficult for the doctor to work this way since she is still hidden by a veil. The first time they can plainly see one another is when he pulls back the curtain. Doc praises Joe's efforts but is completely mesmerized by her attractiveness. He ignores everything Doc says and stares at her as if she were the last one left on the planet. He asks him to check on Joe after bringing her out of his fantasy. After cautiously grabbing her arm to check her pulse, Joe clears his throat. His heart had been thumping more quickly than normal the whole time. He released her arm and went in search of the thermometer. Doc finds it amusing to see Joe struggle to do a straightforward job. He cannot help but worry for him as he observes the budding youthful love. He gives him some advice on how to concentrate on his task and avoid becoming sidetracked while they are walking back. The next day, Joe notices a flashy red automobile approaching him as he is driving the herbs to Grace's home. Joe is interested in the car since it is a rare object. Dr. Reyes, whom Mr. Danielson had called, is the person behind the wheel of the vehicle. He informs him where their residence is after asking Joe for directions. Joe accepts the task and sprints as quickly as he can to get there before Dr. Reyes can. Dr. Reyes observes him as he travels along the same path as Mr. Taki. He can't help but be impressed by this guy. Despite the fact that he loses this battle, Reyes is treated honorably by Mr. Danielson, and he is exempt from the regulations that apply to Doc and Joe. Grace is easily introduced to him, and he instantly falls in love with her. His family believes that he is the right doctor for them. They are repulsed by Joe when they see him approaching them. They inform him that Dr. Reyes will now serve as their primary care physician and that Doc should not worry about them in order to maintain his focus on workers. Joe turns around as she walks away and notices Grace sitting by her window. She motions for him to wait while waving at him. His face is adorned with the biggest grin as he happily remains. He is instructed to enter by the rear door, and she writes on a piece of paper. He reads it and immediately runs there. Dr. Reyes is occupied trying to win over Grace's family. Grace silently slips away without anybody knowing in the meantime. Grace is struck by Joe, who stops her from falling. He is dragged inside when she clutches his arm. They are having a difficult time communicating with one another, which makes things unpleasant. Joe has to deliver the medications, and Doc is waiting. They attempt to converse briefly but are interrupted by commotion from outside. She wants him to go, but he gives her a flower behind her ear and advises her to shut her eyes before he leaves. He has already left when she opens her eyes. The bank delivers news to Mr. Danielson that he has been dreading. According to his accountant, he is about to declare bankruptcy and is unsure of what to do. His mother walks out and asks what the hubbub is all about. He first attempts to lie, but his mother is insistent and tells him to tell the truth. He claims that only a miracle can save them from poverty, and they each blame the other for the failure. She proudly displays the flower that Joe gave her at the dinner table. She keeps grinning as Dr. Reyes compliments her more and more. She appreciates his kindness as he presents her with a fashion magazine. Reyes has shown a lot of interest in Grace, and her father and grandmother see this and grin at one another. Reyes accepts Danielson's offer to give him Doc's apartment since it would allow him to see Grace more often. Joe sees Reyes in the town when he travels there. He approaches him and continues to be amazed by his automobile. Joe is happy to accept Reyes' offer to drive him somewhere. Similar to how he captivated Grace's family, Reyes has charmed Joe. Joe volunteers to help Reyes on the journey since he feels he could be better educated than document. Reyes hears him talking about Grace and realizes he has feelings for her. He mocks him for being able to perceive his unattainable ambitions. He is given a drink by Reyes, who then commands him to man up. Reyes tells him to see him in the morning without giving it any thought. When Joe returns home, Doc is there to greet him. Reyes has pledged to teach him contemporary medicine. According to Joe, Doc chastises Reyes for spending time with his rivals rather than assisting him since he knows he doesn't have the best of intentions. But as long as he gets to drive his automobile, he doesn't care. The next day, Reyes takes Joe with him to a mill for his first case. He is as obedient to his orders as a dove, even carrying his coffee cup while driving. Reyes rebuts Danielson's attempt to protest Joe's presence by pointing out that they need a translator. The patient is Danielson's accountant, who injured himself and doesn't want any medical attention. He too lost all of his money, just as Danielson had. Reyes instructs Joe to hold him and beats the man instead of treating him. Joe doesn't comprehend his strategies. Joe is perplexed when he asks her to bring salt since the recommended course of action in this circumstance is to utilize charcoal. Reyes hesitantly concurs and requests that he bring some. Because he employs the incorrect method, he is unable to make the guy throw up. When Joe sees this, she offers to assist. Reyes approaches Danielson and informs him that they are running late, but Joe is able to resuscitate him. In actuality, Reyes is incompetent, and Joe's presence terrifies him. He informs him that they can no longer collaborate before leaving without more explanation. Joe is pained as he keeps running till he reaches the cliff's brink. He stands there and inhales the clean air while admiring the stunning scenery. Grace observes her father and grandma being very kind to her during the dinner. They declare their intention to wed her to Dr. Reyes. Gracie is split, a nightmare for Grace, but a match made in heaven for them. Reyes had told her father that he would make an investment in the family business, saving them from going bankrupt. Danielson and his mother were hoping for a miracle, but his daughter was sacrificed in the process. Grace protests that he is considerably older than she is, but they don't care since they are just concerned with the money. She rushes out and tells them to stop talking to her. While getting her ready for the appointment with Reyes, Miss Hanabusa stays to assure her that she has her back no matter what. When she looks out her window, Joe is there waiting for her. They reconnect in the same location as they first did. Grace feels hurt, but she masks it with a grin. Joe presents her with a flower from a mountain and tells her the legend around its name. They bear the names of a princess and a commoner who, in spite of their differences, fell in love and were punished as a result. Together, they are whole, and alone, they are nothing. Grace is crying because she recognizes herself as the princess in his tale. Joe notices that she is depressed and asks her what it is. She informs him that their wedding is in 2 weeks and that her father has already given Dr. Reyes her hand in marriage. Joe experiences suffering beyond anything he could have imagined. He gives her a hug and gives her the solace she needs. On his shoulder, Grace sobs, letting go of all her concerns. They enjoy a private moment before Joe departs. Reyes presents her daughter, who is even older than Grace, to the little gathering. Joe is sitting next to Doc as he sobs quietly while gazing into nowhere. Doc still asks what's wrong even if he is at a loss for words. When he informs Doc about her marriage, Doc gives him the wise advice to not give up if he genuinely loves her. Nobody can separate them if they are destined to be together. Winds transport the smoke to their island on days when volcanoes erupt. These days are the busiest for Doc and Joe since many individuals who work outdoors are affected. When Danielson's cart becomes stuck, they are out there assisting farmers. He's traveling to Hilo to talk about his bankruptcy and let them know that Grace has married into an affluent family. Danielson pulls the driver away despite his objections, since he is furious about being late. He stumbles into the ditch while attempting to get the wheel to turn on its own. Fortunately, Doc and Joe are on the same road and can hear his driver screaming for assistance. The doctor's main fear is that he may have injured his head after carefully evaluating him. The only thing that can get him out of here is his automobile, so he begs Joe to go and get Reyes. He tells Reyes on time while running as quickly as he can. Reyes attempts to disagree when Doc says that he could be suffering from a brain hemorrhage, but he interrupts him. They must get him the right care since they don't have time for the dispute. Doc attempts to perform the right treatment to save his life, but Reyes and Grace's grandma forbid them. Mrs. Danielson doesn't even think Doc is a qualified physician and only has confidence in Dr. Reyes. He attempts to reason with them, but they are blinded by their hatred. Unfortunately, Doc and Joe have no choice but to go. Later, Grace runs outside and reports that her father has passed away. She sobs while hugging Joe. Grace is overcome by her sadness and ignores Miss Hanabusa's attempts to remove her from him. From inside, Reyes' daughter notices this. Reyes is informed by Mrs. Danielson that his absence is not his fault. The truth is right there for her to see, yet she still won't let go of her ignorance. She suggests that because the man of the house is no longer there, they get married even earlier than was originally planned. In order to view what she is seeing, his daughter invites them to go outdoors. As they go, they see Grace and Joe in an embrace. She is asked to enter the house by her grandma, but she declines. She says that she will remain with Joe while holding his hand and demonstrating their apparent affection. Grace is yanked away from them by Mrs. Danielson, who is enraged by this and prohibits her from ever seeing him again. Joe and Doc decide to return home after losing. Joe questions if Danielson's life might have been saved. Although he is dissatisfied with how things turn out, Doc prevents him from losing heart. He is pleased with him for handling the situation so effectively. Joe has given up all hope, but Doc is still certain that if he continues trying, he will win her back. He addresses Joe as his son and advises him not to let others define who he is. Reyes is seen approaching from behind. Doc questions what he wants from them, but as he continues to approach, it becomes more and more obvious that he is there to harm them. Joe is pushed aside by Doc, but he is helpless. Joe rushes over to him as he is being struck by his vehicle. He attempts to assist him, but he is pressed for time. Doc died shortly after that. Joe has the same level of anguish that he did as a youngster, but it is now more intense. He was just a little kid at the time, not even aware of what life was. But Doc was the parent who supported him when no one else wanted him. Reyes pushes ahead with a plan to fabricate the report to make it seem as if there was an accident. Reyes warns Joe to leave the area or he will become the next victim. Joe screams in the woods as she flees through the night to nothingness. Like his mother, he can see Doc from a distance but cannot approach him since Reyes is standing next to him like a hawk. Joe is unable to change the situation. He gathers his belongings and returns to the house where he formerly resided with his mother. He laments their silence. Grace's grandma advises her to be upbeat when Reyes comes on the day of her wedding. She wishes she were somewhere else and believes there is no chance of being rescued. The attorney said that Doc had a good relationship with Joe. The excellent news he delivers to him is nothing short of a miracle. Doc's efforts have paid off, and he is now recognized as Joe's father by the law. After saying thank you to the attorney, Joe takes off to protect his remaining happiness. Prior to Dr. Reyes' arrival, he must arrive for the wedding ceremony. This time, he is motivated to win after seeing his automobile. Everyone is waiting for Reyes to show up, but before he can, Joe appears out of nowhere. He outruns his automobile in speed, and everyone in the audience can see his tenacity. Reyes wrecks his vehicle while inebriated, but Mrs. Danielson continues to hold Joe accountable. He has a father, despite her attempt to make fun of him by stating he doesn't. Joe declares that he is no longer Joe and that Dr. Elias Lawrence, has officially adopted him. Joe Lawrence is him. Grace's legal guardian, Miss Hanabusa, accepts his request for her hand in marriage. When Miss Hanabusa reveals that Danielson is truly bankrupt, Reyes gets out of the vehicle and insists she marry him. When he learns this, he loses his rage since he just wanted to marry her for the money. Reyes makes himself seem bad, and everyone can see it. Young Dr. Joe Lawrence now resides in the home with his wife. Hanabusa proceeds to carry out the crimes that Reyes committed by having him arrested.